Welcome to another episode of Behind the Wrestler, and I am sitting here with Spencer Kyle. So Spencer, thank you very much for joining us today. So we will jump right in. How did you first start watching wrestling, and what's your earliest memory of wrestling?
I started watching wrestling in 2006, and I was living in Christchurch at the time. I was flicking through channels with my dad, and basically I just saw people getting in with chairs. I think at the time it was the Edge and Matt leader feud, and I just really loved how real it was. Quotes on that, and it really hooked me. I loved seeing the guys, how big they were, how jacked they were. I was really into bodybuilding, and I still am. Fitness, the generic thing, the athleticism, the characters, the ambience, the lighting, just how WWE produces their product. It got me hooked from a very early age. That's it.
So you mentioned that you had an interest in bodybuilding. Is this something else that you've looked at pursuing, or that you looked at pursuing when you were younger before you started wrestling?
I've wanted to do bodybuilding. I do want to do bodybuilding right now, actually, but unfortunately, due to age, there are restrictions as to what I can do. I was hoping there would be something in my school or something like that. Powerlifting team, CrossFit team, something that involves somewhat of exercising, and I was hoping to take that up, but there is unfortunately nothing that I can do as of now, or as of yet, that involves bodybuilding.
So you're just kind of waiting for something to become available to get a little bit older. So you moved from Christchurch to Auckland and began wrestling training. How long, or sort of what age did you start wrestling training, and how did you get it, or how did you find out about training?
I found out about training by looking places up in Auckland when I moved here in 2010, 2011, and I found Maniacs United, which is run by Stacey Stewart, and she's also known as JBE, just plain evil. And I joined up early 2012, 5 years ago. Trained there for about 3 years. Made the transition to Hughes. I felt the environment it met my standards more, if that makes any sense, and I felt it was where I belonged. I liked how training was done better, and the technical side of things. So about 5 years, 3 at Maniacs, 2 at Hughes so far. It's going pretty well.
So you mentioned that you made a switch from training with Maniacs United to the Hughes Academy, where you now train. So do you remember much about the early days of training with Maniacs United? Do you remember your first training session there, when it was, what you did in your first session, and how you felt afterwards?
I felt really good, and I think I got a lot of, not so much hate, but I think people disliked me in some ways because they thought I came in and I just picked things up really fast. I remember doing bumps the first time, and I always found a way to do things first try. And I felt really proud of myself because I'm a perfectionist. I didn't have an ego or anything, but I don't think some people didn't necessarily like me just because of how young I was at the time, and how fast I was picking things up and doing things at a rate some of my age probably shouldn't have been.
So you mentioned about being able to pick things up quickly. Was there anything in particular that you were surprised that you managed to pick up as quickly as you did, whether it be taking bumps or some of the high-flying things? Was there anything that stands out to you that you picked up what would be unusually quickly?
Probably bumps, just because it's not normal to throw yourself onto a ground, especially flip bumps. I've had some training martial arts, so I could do rolls and stuff. Um, but bumping was really weird, even though I picked it up really fast. Just the idea of slamming yourself on purpose, or often not on purpose and slamming you. It was a good but weird change, and I enjoyed it, sickly and oddly enough.
So with sort of a more focus on training,
Yeah.
outside of wrestling training, what other training do you do? You mentioned martial arts, and I know you go to gymnastics as well. So what other training elements do you have in your life?
Well, I used to do judo when I was quite young, back in Christchurch, and I've stopped that since. I now do BJJ, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which is run by a guy called Pedro Tukaha, and that is a new one in Auckland, which I love. It's a strong passion of mine. Self-defense. What else? I've done many martial arts, but at different times. My dad does Aikido, and he's also done karate, and he also helps me in those expertise. He passes on knowledge to me. And I like just going back and forth to different martial arts and seeing how things are done different ways and getting a better overall understanding for martial arts as a whole.
So you mentioned BJJ training. So how does the training differ from pro wrestling training? And has there ever been any conflict between learning different styles and the difference between like BJJ and judo and pro wrestling?
Not necessarily pro wrestling. Many people won't know this, but I did 2 sessions, I think, of amateur wrestling, and I had to unfortunately stop because it was too far out from where I lived. Giving that a go, it was really different to BJJ, because BJJ is all on the ground and you're allowed to have your shoulders on the ground, tap people out and stuff. But amateur wrestling, you have to kind of stay off your shoulders and you're trying to pin the other person, and it's just going back and forth. It's really confusing sometimes. So those two are definitely very different. But pro wrestling, I think you can incorporate some of the BJJ moves, submissions into pro wrestling and have a unique twist on things. You know how to react to things because you know what pain feels like, and it makes it a lot easier too.
So when you in the early days and the early years of you training to be a professional wrestler, did you go to many New Zealand shows? And if you did, whose shows did you go to?
The first show I probably went to was an IPW show, 2011, I would say. Didn't know too much about them at the time, but I just seen posters around, and I went over there once. I saw, I think it was Kingy and Evie, Liam Fury, a couple other people, guys and girls. Don't necessarily remember, it was quite a while ago, but I remember seeing them. It made me further want to pursue my dream, seeing that there was a scene in New Zealand, and at that time it wasn't too big, but I knew it would become something more than it was at that time, and I wanted to be part of something. See it change, be a part of that scene, like I wanted to be when I was 4 years old when I first started watching wrestling.
So since starting pro wrestling training and excuse me, becoming sort of a full-fledged trainee of a few different places, you've seen behind the curtain and been brought into helping out at shows instead of being sitting in the crowd. Are there any challenges that you've noticed from helping out at shows and sort of being a cameraman, doing the music, all that kind of stuff? What are the challenges that you've faced along those lines?
One thing I've noticed is that it's very, very hard, and those people often go underappreciated. I see tons of people. I'll bring his name into the mix, Ryan McMahon. I don't think he gets enough credit. He does get a lot of credit, but probably not enough. He does filming for many shows, Guys like him working behind the scenes, they go unseen, but a lot of what they do transpires into the product that you see. Very hard, very tiring, and it gives you a bit of appreciation for the business as a whole, seeing different aspects of how shows run.
So, since you've been training, and you mentioned that you switched over from training with Maniacs United to training with the Hughes Academy, and when you came over to training with us from Maniacs, one of the things we were very adamant about was given your age and about not doing shows until you were 16. So you had a long road ahead of you for waiting to do shows. So how did you stay motivated during that time when there was no promise of shows and there was no guarantee of shows anytime soon?
Well, I can't lie, that was very, very hard. It did take a toll. I did have breakdowns sometimes because it was very emotional. I'd been working or being in the business but not actually wrestling for about 4 years, almost 5 years at the time. Doing behind the scenes work and training, seeing younger people come up and then basically take what could have been your spot if you were at the age to have that spot.
So with that in mind, do you remember how long it was into training that you got your first show, and how did you find out that you were having your first show? And you remember the circumstances around that?
Yes, I had been offered one show before I'd actually debuted, like 2014, but I was not ready at the time, and things didn't work out. 2016 was my debut. In May, technically my unofficial debut was in the Rumble, May 7th. I was number 2, got thrown out pretty quickly. My singles debut, or my official debut as I'd call it, was on October 22nd, against Graham Hughes, and honestly, I couldn't be more proud of that match. I wouldn't say it was the best match of all time by any means, because it wasn't, but to me, I really loved it because it was my first match and it was against someone that I have so much respect for. Probably doesn't even know that. It's very moving as well. Just having that time of 5 years to actually debut, making tons of friends and having that pressure of 5 years of training all of a sudden it's dumped on you one night and then showtime, that's it.
So you mentioned you had a sort of an unofficial debut, which was May of 2016 in the Hughes Academy, Interpromotional Rumble, as it gets called. So do you remember how you found out that you were going to be in the Rumble, and how were you feeling backstage before you went out for the actual Rumble match?
I started crying before I went out. The Rumble, I found out the Hughes Academy made a get together. We were watching Elimination Chamber 2016, and it was basically broken to me that my dad and I were going to be in the Rumble, and he was wrestling as Chico the Cholo. I don't know why, don't ask. And wow, it's so bad. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that. And again, it was very emotional. That was my debut, unofficial still, and the amount of people that were in the ring and the amount of people that were outside of the ring watching, there was a lot of pressure on me, and I felt there was. Other people say there wasn't, but I feel there was, just to do the right thing and have everything perfect on my debut that I've been training for 5 years, 4 years at the time. Yeah, that's it's kind of hard to talk about and explain in a way that I think people will understand. Because for me it was very hard, but other people probably won't understand that as much. Not having to go through that same process.
I mean, it was a long time between when you started training and when you got your first match, and typically it's normally about a year. In New Zealand, it seems to be a lot less. So you mentioned before about it can be difficult sometimes to see people who had started way after you, like a couple of years in some cases, and then make it onto shows seemingly quite quickly, and obviously not in that having to wait the 5 years. So how did you cope with that as an issue? Obviously, being a little bit younger and knowing that you still got a long wait. What were some of the things that you did to cope, and how did you motivate yourself to carry on training and to carry on towards the goal of debuting on your show?
Well, I don't think anything could stop me, in the sense that I loved it too much to ever stop. And not having debuted earlier wouldn't have crushed my spirits. To kind of take my focus away from that and look elsewhere from the fact that I couldn't debut so early, I would try and, I wouldn't say necessarily help, because I probably couldn't help, but I would try and focus on other people and their debuts at their time, because I knew my time would come, even if it would be a few years later, and I know their debut would be just as important as mine, regardless of how much they've been waiting for it or how much they want it or not. Still the same importance, and I'll try and help them and support them as they go through their process.
So you mentioned that your dad debuted in the same rumble that you debuted in as Chico the Cholo, and we'll save why he was Chico the Cholo for another day. But a little known fact is that your dad did pro wrestling training with you for almost a year, I believe it was, give or take. So how was it training with your dad being there? Did you find it motivational, or did you find it off-putting at points? Because it's quite a hard thing to have your parents there.
Never been off-putting. I have no problems whatsoever with my parents. I actually get along with them better than most people probably do with their parents. And it was really motivating to have him there. Probably more emotional towards the Rumble, to have him in the same ring at the same time, at the same moment, same place, same love for the business, because my dad, was watching wrestling as a kid when he was young, and you have the old memories and flashbacks and nostalgia of a little, baby me and my dad in Christchurch, wrestling on the bed, watching wrestling tapes, technical matches like Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, and again Edge and Matt and Mita and stuff like that. And training was never an issue, the show was never an issue, but it was more emotional than anything, I think. But it always pushed me to better myself, to make my father proud of me, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say.
So since having your debut, you've been on a couple of shows at this point, being 17th of January, and in a few days you have, I think, 3 matches or 2 matches in one night. So what are some of the things that you're looking forward to as you go forward? You've had your debut, you've had another couple of matches under your belt, so what are you looking forward to about wrestling on the New Zealand scene and the future for you as a wrestler?
Got this part out. Just working with more people. I love what I'm working with now, but to wrestle other people from other schools, other promotions, seeing how they wrestle, seeing how they do things, the experience will be overwhelming for me. To wrestle other people who I've known for quite a few years, but I've never had the opportunity to be in the ring with them. Like Rough Guts, who I will be fighting on the 21st of January in Tauranga. Hasn't been announced yet, that's why I said edit this out. and I think I'm in a tag match in Tauranga as well. Not sure yet. And the amount of people that will be in Tauranga and getting to wrestle other people is going to be quite insane for me. And I'm going to enjoy it every step of the way though. Go my all, regardless. Hopefully you see something different as well.
So, since you've made your debut, how have you found training to be? Have you found it easier and you've come back from your debut raring to go and ready to train and keep training, or has it been harder since you've made your debut? Explain how training is now since you've made your debut and you're sort of a professional wrestler now.
I don't think training's changed, to be honest. In the sense that having debuted shouldn't change anything in the way your work ethic is. Training, wrestling, not wrestling, the way you conduct yourself and you turn up to trainings and give it your all, always show up, want to rip this off someone's gimmick, always be the hardest working, worker in the room, saying I'm too much, and don't laugh. Losing my train of thought. Essentially, having been on shows shouldn't change anything, because I don't see why it should. Yes.
So you're obviously just training just as hard as you were when you were waiting to make your debut. So you had your first match against myself, Graham Hughes, who's also your trainer. During show days, I'm generally quite busy, so I don't have a chance to discuss options and go over matches and things beforehand. And you only had 3 days notice, 4 days notice
4 days
to know you were going to wrestle. So do you remember how you were told to have you were going to have your singles debut, and how that all came around?
We were doing a fully market, if you will, or just a market in general, in Avondale, I think it was, and we were, selling, handing out, posters and flyers to our next show, which was in October. And I hadn't been on that show yet, and I was wrestling Curtis Castlewood and Cardiff just rolling around mats, and Graham and Tanya just saw something in me that day, and they had enough faith to say, we're going to put you on a show because someone else had to pull out at that day, and they put me in there in that spot against Graham. I think it was originally a triple threat match, and then it went down to 2, which was us 2. So I was happy, but I was also sad for that person who pulled out or who wasn't wrestling that day. But I think if he hadn't been out of that match, I wouldn't have got that opportunity to show off my skills and my ability, I guess, and to kind of not show off, but show off and show the things that I can do despite me being very young and not really being allowed to be on shows right now.
So going back to a little part of the previous question, with wrestling somebody like Graham, who has to run the show and is generally quite busy, what were some of the challenges that you found and you faced by wrestling somebody on the show who you didn't really get a chance to chat to and go over the match with much before? Explain how difficult that was and what you were feeling going into that match.
I apologise for not really answering that question. It's a lot easier actually, and I prefer it that way because I didn't have time to worry and plan and try and remember stuff that I knew I was going to forget as soon as I walked out the curtain and moments before. Doing things on the fly is probably the easiest thing I've ever done, because again I just forget everything and I don't need to worry about that part. It's just on the fly, it's fun, it's easy, it's a good time, and that's how I'd probably prefer things. So I don't think Graham being busy would actually necessarily interfere. If anything, it would probably be better for me just knowing that I'd do better.
What can we look forward to from Spencer Kyle and for the year ahead? What are some goals in shows that you're looking at hitting, and do you have any goals for the shows ahead that you'd like to achieve?
My goals are probably just wrestling more places, wrestling more people. I think that's pretty much it. It's just the more people I fight, the more people I verse. Don't care who it is. Don't care where I'm necessarily wrestling per se. I think that would just be a good experience, and I would enjoy it. I would love it. Especially if I could find wrestle on a Maniac show this year. It's one of my goals. I'm not sure that will work out, but I'm gonna try and make it happen. Hopefully you can scram, maybe Stacey. That's my goal. Maybe a triple threat match. Just putting it out there. Intend to book this now. And I would love to see that. I would love to wrestle more places, especially Maniacs United, as I've stated before. And that's pretty much it for me.
Okay, so your dad said that he is the biggest influence in your life.
Of course it is.
And you learn most of your cool stuff from him. So what are your thoughts on that, Spencer?
Did he send that to you now, didn't he? Yeah. Well, so he found me on the street one day. No. This is so bad. It's so forced. He definitely is one of the biggest influences in my life. You can text him this now. Make it sincere. This is a rib. I love him to bits. He's one of the funniest men I've ever met. I get a lot of my content and my jokes from him. So if you ever hear any bad jokes, the man to go to. And very supportive, very tough when he needs to be. He sees what I want to go for, and then he's very, how do I say this? He's very, what's the word? Anyway, he knows what I want to go for, and he helps support. That's the word. Don't judge. He supports everything I do, even if he necessarily doesn't agree with them. As long as I'm healthy, I'm happy, I'm safe, he couldn't be happier for me. That's probably the best thing I can ask for as a dad. From my dad. Yes. He's a good man.
So, Spencer Kyle, thank you very much for being on our Behind the Wrestler interview series. Is there anywhere that if fans or people want to reach out to you, maybe bookers want to reach out to you about shows? Hopefully. Is there anywhere that they can then contact you, or can they contact you via the Hughes Academy website and all that kind of stuff? Where can people get hold of you?
Just go through the Hughes Academy website, contact the Facebook page, which is www.hughesacademyfacebook.com, I think, .co.nz, either or, and message the main site, if you will. You can also got this out. Find Graham Hughes on there as well. His personal account, message him there.
Yeah, don't do that.
For bookings, I guess. But take that up with the man himself first.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, Spencer. And we look forward to seeing what you'll be up to this year.